Yes, thank you, Ben, Francesca, and Mike for organizing this conference and including me in the program. When I saw the title, I immediately, something clicked immediately, and I said, I have to do something for this. And so I tried to combine three older presentations in one. Of course, this means that it's a long presentation. I mean, you see many slides, but I won't talk. I won't read the present. I will leave the text and try to speak outside the text as much as possible. First of all, for those who don't know me, if you are wondering, my name is German, so that means that I'm familiar with German culture. I studied at the LSE, so I'm familiar with British culture. Of course, these times were those times were much different than the Brexit situation today. And I'm a fan also of Spanish, Italian, and other European cultures. So I believe that we are culturally dominated, as Jean said. And I want to thank also Jean and Dorina for the previous presentation. I tried to incorporate a few things in my presentation also. Since I'm Greek, I feel, let's say, obliged to tell you that you will not hear anything about Aristotle and Plato, or in any case, contemporary Greece doesn't have any connection with ancient Greece. And this is something we try to show for the first time in the world in the 2004 Olympics. Again, oh my God, don't see that these things move. Of course, I suppose you all know which film got the Oscar for this year, and we can have a lot of discussion about it and what does it mean, why various associations dominated by for example, the BAFTA gave the award to All Quiet in the Western Front, which is a German film, as you know. The Golden Globes went to two different films from this. Could this happen only in the United States? Although it is, I mean, most of the, let's say, people involved in this are from Asian origin. But anyhow, the title remembers perhaps the situation in relation to my subject and the situation in planning theories. Roughly, these are the contents. I mean, after an introduction, I will try to combine, as I said, the three previous works relating with the impact of PUB, what is called pop studies. I used it as pop urban studies, incorporation of music in the city as an art expression. This is just an example. And then the relation between urban planning and biology, and some rather long conclusions. I try to make them as short as possible. Now, you are all familiar with the phrases we often hear in recent years, for example, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. In relation to theory, all this transfer, the necessity of transfer comes usually to periods of crisis when we need more hope for the future, but of course we need a certainty also in relation to the past. The central hypothesis is how knowledge transfer is connected reciprocally to the creative implementation of eclecticism in planning. We have discussed before that. I was using the term grand theory, but I realized that the better term is universal theory, as we discussed before. We have quite a few, let's say, examples in the history of planning. Today, it seems that we don't need universal theory. That's why they don't exist. And this relates also to what Jean said before, and also to the domination of culture and history, as Dorina mentioned. And of course, we have a continuous impact of other fields like geography and management, but what I try to do is discover perhaps some new tendencies that, of course, were through the filter of my personal elaboration. These three new tendencies is the impact of the broader field of pop studies, the so-called smart thinking in certain bookstores, if you notice the categories that they have. The willingness to incorporate art forms, this was also mentioned by Jean before, and the necessity to reconnect urban planning and biology. Perhaps after the experience of COVID, it seems that this became more necessary than before, although it is rooted also in the history. Since, of course, this paper is theoretical, the main method was reading texts, and these are my three previous presentations, two in Aesop and one in Eura, that I tried to connect. So there are some primary research questions, not each subject, of course, has additional questions. And the first is if the multidisciplinary field of urban studies has joined the phenomenon of pop studies, and how do songs represent the city's transition, mainly through urban spaces, and how does this relate to a new approach of urban cultural planning? And the third is what is the current relationship between biology and urban planning, and how does it affect a new approach that came in a very interesting book, the reconnection of the divided town and country. Now, the other necessity that is linked with all this approach, especially the pop urban studies, I think we discussed that before, how easy can the students, the broader public, or even us as experts, how easily can we understand all these issues? I mean, I found myself during all these years, starting as a student and ending as a professor, that were really some conferences that were more or less specialized, for example, in economics or in law or in other fields. I couldn't really understand what people were saying. And actually, my best, I think one of my best presentations were done in the department where my daughter was studying, because I had in my mind the fact that my daughter was in the audience. And I was, in every sentence, I was asking myself, will she understand it? So this ended up to be one of my best presentations. In relation to this field, we can ask some additional questions. For example, which main function of urban planning most people use it to seek their identity. This is the issue of identity we discussed before, and well-being, which is another subject which is, let's say, fashionable now. We have seen also the phenomenon of new type of urbanities, which relate space and time, and how they're, what's their importance in this line of thought. And again, of course, if all these elaborations are leading to a convergence rather than a divergence of the discipline, of the various disciplines. There is the past is always there, and this was another opportunity to reinterpret the past. For example, I believe we all agree that the first really popular book about urban planning was by Ebenezer Howard, but then we had to wait quite a long time for the second one. Perhaps there is some book in between which I missed, which is Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of Great American Cities. Then we have the prominent figure of Lewis Mumford, which was also very prolific, who was also very prolific, but of course famous for this book, City in History. Then again, we have to wait for the landmark in the contemporary history of pop urban studies, which is Age City by Joel Garreau. And what we observe in the current situation is that this tendency has moved away from books and moved to television productions and also to various films. This is not too extended, of course, but the important thing is that there are examples. Unfortunately, as we discussed before, also many things are belong to the Anglo-American world. I don't want to speak about Anglophone because I didn't cover the other countries. There are some French examples, but the difference is that in these examples, the authors are primarily academics. what happens in let's say the Anglo-American world in pop urban studies is that usually there are two authors. One is academic and the other is usually a journalist. So it's not solely focused on academics. There are a few examples also from Italian authors and German authors and Spanish authors, but this is the domination is clear. Now, what I did, but I'm not going to refer to detail in this, is to pick some case studies. I don't know if you're familiar with these people. Rebecca Sonnet, which is perhaps the most prolific writer in this field. Carlo Honoré, who is a prominent exponent, is a journalist. He's a prominent exponent of the slow movement. Alain de Botton, of course, probably you all know him. He's the star. He writes about everything. He wrote about the architecture of happiness, which relates to this subject. Barbara Ehrenreich and Anna Minton, who is the most recent of the five and connects also to the next subject I will deal with. This is the book that I focused in the case of Rebecca Sonnet, a very interesting, all these books are exciting to read. This is what for sure. It's called Hollow City and it refers to San Francisco. This is Carlo Honoré in Praise of Slow, how urban movements challenge the cult of speed. It has one subject about the city, one chapter about cities and one about leisure. This is Alain de Botton's, also very, of course, he is also fluent in writing, and he, as I said, has certain TV productions. The title reminds us to another song, which is also a song is the title of this conference, Dancing in the Streets, another very interesting book. And probably this is morally related to planning. That's why I referred to urban studies in the previous cases. Anna Minton, Ground Control, and the second edition with a chapter on the London Olympics. Fear and happiness in the very interesting combination of these terms in the 21st century city. Now we move to the second elaboration, which was an attempt to take an example of art. I mean, we saw in the case of Ginny also that there are pictures. We know that films are also there. And I remember Leonie Sadnercock in Venice that she told us that there are some courses that they were asking to submit videos and not, let's say, the usual type of projects. So film is also involved into that, and I would say TV series also. Now, some additional questions relating to music is if in the contemporary world songs belong more to art or to industry. If they are confined to popular culture, what role do they play in the relationship between conception and production as well as between the local and the global? And if their role is strengthened in the case of cities in socioeconomic crisis? We can say many things about music, but perhaps the most interesting term in this field is soundscape, something discovered in 1969, and it still more or less is a field that is growing. There is an ASOP group which has presented its work in previous ASOP conferences. Now, probably this is the best example we can find. Anna Minton is involved in that also. It's another exciting book called Regeneration Songs, and taking let's say, based on the 2012 Olympics in London, they tried to involve music and also people telling their stories, because planners are storytellers, as Klaus Kunzmann told me in an interview in 2002 in Volos, where we had our conference. And the title of Aesop also reminds us that, because it's this is the only ancient Greek name I will refer. to the concerning the fables he wrote. You know him, I presume. And now I have some examples of songs, but since I will try to be as short as possible, I just you will have the links in the presentation, and you can hear them yourself. Ray Cooder wrote a very nice song called Gentrification in the 2010 album, 18, yes. And he ends the song with I cannot understand why an uptown Google man wants a downtown room like mine. Now, my case was Athens, but again, I will not cover too much, especially in Greek lyrics. And this is another issue concerning culture. If I wanted to put you the Greek songs, you could understand the music, but you could not understand the lyrics. And if somebody tells us that I tell you that this director or this composer is the best or one of the best in Europe or the world, if you don't know him, or if we don't know, this happens also with German films and TV series, and the same with Italian, the same with French. They are not, let's say, have their position they could have in an Anglo-American world dominated by the Anglo-American approach. However, Nick Cave, who is a fan of Greece, he has given too many concerts, did a song in the period of the crisis called Lightning Blocks. For some reason, I cannot find the video anymore, but this is in the YouTube. It's just the lyrics and the song, but no video. You can see also the reference in the period that we had also. Actually, it was a period that things that happening now in European countries, for example, the situation with universities in Britain and with the pensions in France, we had this story 10 years ago. So in a sense, we lived this situation, so we know what happens in other European countries. We hope we're not going to live it again, at least in the near future, but now we learn from our mistakes, and we learn from the crisis, and we hope that we'll have a better future. Now, these are some common things, but again, I don't want to go into details. Of course, there is a link with urban spaces, starting from the 60s, where there was, let's say, the situation was more to enjoy life also in third spaces, and coming to the crisis, again, which was reflected into the urban spaces. Now I come to the third part of this presentation. These are pictures we saw during the pandemic, animals returning to the city. This is my main inspiration, this book, another exciting book. Unfortunately, I missed it when it was published in English. The author is Dutch. And I discovered it when it was translated into Greek, but this is the edition in English. Of course, we remember that. I don't know how many Plavins remember that Patrick Geddes was a biologist in a period that biology was considered to be a type of multidisciplinary branch of knowledge, probably the most characteristic one. Of course, there were other authors after Geddes, like Louis Mumford that we mentioned before also, and some other personalities not related to planning. The questions here is what is natural in the urban environment? What is the importance of time in the perception of this relationship between biology and the city? And if a particular approach to biology, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution, shows us the constraints to urban planning, and to what degree the labeling of cities can be helpful. Okay, let's move more quick to that. Of course, the umbrella, the conceptual umbrella is the factor of nature in the city, how nature can be incorporated in the city. In relation to urban planning, in his first phase, Goethe, of course, has developed many interesting diagrams, but these were the formative years that he had developed this approach of the biologist concerning the city. Of course, we also know that he was the initiator of asking for surveys before we produce plans. Now, the most recent tendency in this field is the biophilic approach to cities, which is a continuation, let's say, of green cities. And there is a network here also existing. There is a very interesting theoretical approach concerning the half-earth city that we can, let's say, conserve and restore half the earth. We have to be conscious about it and not the whole earth. This is probably one of the most famous examples of how nature can take over again urban spaces. This is famous, but probably this is not so famous, but it's also very interesting. It's in Mumbai, one park called One Green Mile. Now, the Schildhuisen, I distinguish two very interesting chapters. One, because it relates to music that I mentioned before, because he provides a fascinating analysis of the natural songs in the city, I mean, based on the songs of the birds. And another thing is the relationship with planning, and where he develops 4 rules of an evolutionary informed urban nature planning. Of course, again, we don't have time to analyze this, but it's a very interesting book to read. One rule is let it grow, one not necessarily native, one pristine pockets. That means a larger reservoir of species is in handy for ecological intervention. And the other is splendid isolation instead of greenways, which was were fashionable. Now, I discovered almost, I think, 1 month ago, this very interesting book, an awarded book by Anna Jones called Divide, and refers to the relationship crisis between town and country. Anna Jones is a freelance journalist, broadcaster, and blogger, no academic, and that means that it is, let's say, by definition, a pop urban studies book. Her main idea is that she believes that the rift between urban and rural communities is the most overlooked cultural division in modern society, and also, her conclusion is, unless we learn to accept and respect our social, cultural, and political differences as town and country people, we are never going to solve the chronic problems in our food system and the environment. Of course, I try to see the connection between COVID-19 and climate change in this problematic, and coming now to the conclusions, trying to keep the 30 minutes limit. The conclusions are more or less based on the 3 separate parts, but then at the end I try to find the common points. These are the common points in relation to urban studies. It's a new phenomenon because it focuses on the 21st century. However, it is rooted in the past. As I mentioned, it's largely, but not solely, an Anglo-American phenomenon. Now, the important thing here is that most authors claim themselves that they are radical. Of course, we had a Greek painter that said, what you say, this is it. I mean, what you claim. I believe we cannot easily accept that, but especially in relation to new urbanism, that it's a part of this tendency. But of course, we can develop our own criticism. The other thing is that there is a general effort to avoid special determinism, but the temptation in many cases is great to let's say, to argue that space can change society, which we lived in the 60s, and again it came with Thatcher. Now, the questions, the answer to the question is that leisure is the principal factor of urban planning, that people try to seek their identity in their well-being. I first saw that in a book by Marx, but then I discovered that Ovidius had said that many, many years ago. I mean, the Roman poet. Now, the new spatial temporal forms of reality are very interesting because there are new types of polyvalent spaces. But actually, the criticism is that these places are actually non-places, as Marcos said, and they serve a fast way of life if we want to adopt Honoré's and not only, or actually the slow movement has its roots in Italy for some years ago. My view, at least, is that the whole approach is more positive than negative, and let's say complies with the general necessity of multidisciplinarity. And of course, I believe that all scientists actually, even if they not confess it, they dream that they write something that sells, of course, and is read by a wider possible audience. Now, the question in part 2 concerning music, I believe that still we are in the situation that things are connected. Of course, songs relate more to popular culture, but this does not mean that they cannot become classics in a sense. And all these new media that allow consumers to become producers is very interesting, but this does not necessarily mean that we, let's say, promote localism. For example, as far as I can remember, in most of gala dinners or various of congresses, we hear only English songs. I know that the effort in Woods this year, and of course I urge you all to come to Woods in July, will be to have a music program, but will be, I mean, their aim is to be that it is more local. Of course, we must always have some English songs because this is the songs that people know, the majority of the people. And of course, the crisis usually provides motivation, and this is also reflected into art forms. Now, concerning urban planning, as I mentioned the example of regeneration songs, and there is a whole very interesting approach on how music can be part of master plans. You have to look at that because it's not difficult to explain in a few words. But another very interesting approach is what Anastasia Lukaitu and her colleagues did in UCLA. They went back and they produced, they have an excellent initiative called Urban Humanities Initiative. They produced an excellent book, and they came back to the conception of urban planning as a social science. Remember, Camillo Sitte claimed that urban planning was an art. Now we come to the answers to the primary questions, and I approach the end, finding the main points between. Of course, the blurring, the boundaries are, in the case of artificial and natural in the city, blurring, that like in most phenomena in recent years. What Schilhausen claims is that although contrary to what they thought, that changes are slow, so we cannot observe them, changes are fast, so, and we can observe them. This is the argument of Schilhausen. Of course, we have to take into account what was the subject of last year's conference, that also non-humans, and mostly this means animals, have to be taken into account in planning. And concerning the labeling of cities, of course, it can be helpful, although it's an easy way also to adopt, like we adopted theories of planning. In the past, we can adapt a label and base that our marketing or branding strategy. Now, the linking items between the three parts. There's a conscious effort to choose catchy subjects. If we want to be popular, let's say, we have to find a catchy subject. But this does not mean that we need an all-encompassing approach, but creatively connect a plurality of approaches. That means adopting eclecticism. Also, multidisciplinarity seems to be a precondition. And it seems again that we are in a stage now, and I'm personally happy about it. Also, as Jean mentioned before, that urban planning needs also arts. I mentioned the example also of Leonie Saderkot. There is an emphasis on urban spaces, mainly public and third spaces, but not only. Again, I believe we live in a period that the interrelationship between space and time is more easily understood. We try to, it seems that we are in an era that we can grasp the relationships between past, present, and the future. The focus is on the future since we focus on strategy, but we rediscover the classics and we reevaluate based on theory some past urban practices. On the other hand, the present is characterized by an emphasis of resources, which, if we take the SWOT analysis approach, this means strengths and opportunities rather than constraints. And again, there is a conscious attempt of authors to be easily understood and widely read, as I mentioned. Now, ending probably in what is in the mind of most people when we say about stealing and eclecticism, how do we define originality into this approach? But of course, what we usually believe is that this implies discovering new theories, but it seems now that it can also imply either throwing new light on existing theories or creatively combining a plurality of tendencies. And this immediately clicked me to what Marcel Proust said, that the voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex, for your